Day Kerber, a former finalist here back in 2016 when she was beaten by Serena Williams. She came through against Jelena Ostapenko, the former French Open champion. 6-3, 6-3 she achieved it. 2 breaks in the first, 2 breaks in the second. And I suppose, Will, for the Wimbledon faithful, I guess, with all of those top seeds that have tumbled out in the first week, that is the final probably most would have wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, John. John Watson live at Wimbledon for us. Finally, let's bring you up to date with the cricket. England really struggling in that first one-dayer against India at Trent Bridge. Owen Morgan's side won the toss. They decided to have a bat first. Half centuries from Josh Buttler and Ben Stokes. It was going well, but then they completely crumbled. Out for 268. Kuldeep Yadav took 6 for 25 in just 10 overs. India yet to reply yet, but they'll need 269 to win, Martin. We'll have more sport for you in the next hour. See you later.
Will, thank you very much. Let's return to our main story this afternoon. Donald Trump has arrived in London for his first visit as President of the United States. His visit comes straight off the back of a fractious NATO summit at which the President has been pushing European allies to increase defence spending. Tonight, the Prime Minister will host a dinner for Mr Trump and his wife Melania. Tomorrow, he'll meet the Queen. My colleague Anita McVeigh is at Regent's Park in central London, and we can join her now. Anita.
Thanks again, Martine. And you mentioned that NATO summit, and at the news conference which followed it, he was asked a range of questions, including, of course, about his visit here to the UK. And he said that he was coming to a hotspot here in the UK. He was talking about the political resignations of David Davis and Boris Johnson earlier in the week. He also said that he thought Brexit wasn't quite what people had voted for, so perhaps not the most helpful comments that he could have made from Theresa May's perspective ahead of arriving here at Stansted Airport at lunchtime. And then very quickly he was brought by the presidential helicopter Marine One to Winfield House, the home of the US ambassador behind me. I'll just move out of the way because we've seen a bit of this today, toing and froing of lots of cars, cavalcades of cars, and police outriders. Now, the President isn't expected to leave Winfield House for Blenheim Palace until later this evening for that dinner hosted by Theresa May, with lots of business leaders attending, but there have been lots of comings and goings from here throughout the day. And you'll see that fence behind me, that's been erected for this visit, this 9 feet high security fence. Lots of roads in this part of London sealed off to create this security perimeter around the ambassador's residence, where the President and the First Lady are and where they will be staying tonight. So we expect to see the President, as I say, leaving here just a little later on. And then he will be going to Blenheim Palace, the birthplace of his hero, Sir Winston Churchill. You may know the story about when Donald Trump moved into the White House and into the Oval Office, a bust of Winston Churchill that had been removed during the Obama presidency was swiftly put back in place. Well, I think we can cross now to close to Blenheim Palace, where my colleague Christian Fraser is watching developments there. Christian.
Anita, thank you very much. Yes, I was reminded actually of my visit to Singapore recently, to that summit that he had with Kim Jong-un, just how big the presidential entourage is when it rolls into town. It's like the arrival of King Henry's court. There's around 30 vehicles in the convoy. We saw it arrive early here at Blenheim about an hour ago, and in that convoy, the Beast, the armoured limousine, which is bomb-proof. It's sealed from any chemical attacks, as well, a 7-seater that Kim Jong-un took quite an interest in when he was there in Singapore, and all the press crews that are travelling with him, they are here early at Blenheim as well. So although this is much more of a low-key visit than a full state visit, it still comes with everything you'd expect of a presidential visit. And tonight, 150 CEOs, the top CEOs in the country, those who have business interests here in the UK as well as in the United States, there'll be a black-tie dinner attended by Donald Trump and also Melania. And it's worth making just a short mention about her because, of course, she's recovering from kidney surgery, and she wasn't wasn't in Singapore, and she's not been on some of his visits of late, but she is alongside him here in the UK, and she'll be at that visit at Windsor when he sees the Queen for tea tomorrow afternoon. Well, let's get some thoughts on the visit and whether it's a good idea. We can talk to Caroline Lucas, the co-leader of the Greens, and the MP, of course, for Brighton Pavilion. She's in our Brighton studio. Caroline Lucas, good to have you with us. 50% of the public think it is a good idea, this visit.
Well, I certainly think it's good to talk to people. I have no problems with a visit in principle. It's the kind of visit that he's being given, and I think once you're rolling out the red carpet and adding tea with the Queen, then it becomes something a lot closer to a state visit. And frankly, for a man who stands for values which are so very different from the ones that I hope we stand for, I think it's quite right that people are protesting that visit and standing up for values of openness, of welcoming to refugees and migrants, of the kind of opposite to the hatred that he is peddling.
On your tweet feed yesterday, you called him a climate vandal. The Prime Minister, you said, needs to call out his climate wrecking.
Exactly. I mean, this is a man who, almost as soon as he got into the White House, deleted references to climate change on the White House webpage. He went on to cut the funding that was going to a number of climate organisations, including the Green Climate Fund, which is to help poorer countries adapt to climate change. He has trashed support for solar power and renewables. He has given the green light for more fossil fuel extraction, and of course famously he withdrew the US from the Paris Climate Agreement. And so when you have someone who is supposedly the leader of the free world, who is turning his back on the evidence, turning his back on the science, and worse than that, actually being counterproductive by pursuing greater emissions of climate gases, then I think it's quite right that we call that out, and I very much hope that Theresa May will do that.
Well, this is what he said at Davos when he did that interview with Piers Morgan. There is a cooling and there's a heating. It used to not be climate change, it used to be global warming. That wasn't working too well because it was getting too cold. The ice caps were going to melt, they were going to be gone by now, but now they are setting records. They're at a record level. Do you think it's incumbent on the business leaders who are there tonight to inform him what climate change actually is?
I would be so delighted if the business leaders would both inform him what it is and also, crucially, demonstrate that by addressing climate change, you can take steps that are actually good for business too. It seems that Trump is locked in this very old-fashioned idea that somehow investment in green technologies is bad for the economy. To the contrary, it's precisely investment in green technologies that can mean that we are leaders when it comes to the economy. So I hope they tell him about that. I hope that Theresa May passes to him a letter that I know she's received from around 135 climate experts, climate scientists in this country, very eminent professors, who are all writing to Theresa May saying, please raise this issue with Donald Trump, because hopefully, perhaps, she might be in a position to put some influence on him to think again about his climate-wrecking position.
Caroline Lucas, good to get your thoughts. Well, it doesn't seem to be on the agenda, climate change. The focal points, we're told, are trade and security. Tomorrow there will be a demonstration by US and UK Special Forces, counter-terrorism demonstration, before he goes to Chequers, of course, for that working lunch with the Prime Minister tomorrow. I would think tonight there's going to be a certain amount of pomp, though, surrounding the dinner. The household division is here. The Scots, Irish and Welsh Guards will be playing when Marine One arrives at the grounds of Blenheim Palace, and surely they're going to show him around the palace as well, particularly those rooms in which Sir Winston Churchill was photographed all those years ago in the Long Library and in the grounds of Blenheim Palace, where of course he most famously painted some of those paintings that hang on the walls. So plenty for him to look at tonight. He's due to arrive in just under 3 hours' time, Anita.
Christian, thank you very much. And I think looking at where Christian is, where I'm standing here, it does remind us that everyone really is being kept at a distance from the locations where the US president will be. Although if you look at the latest polling around thoughts on this visit from YouGov, attitudes seem to have shifted somewhat. More people saying that they are okay with the idea of this as a working visit, not a state visit. That's where the difference has emerged, because originally, of course, this was supposed to be a state visit. That was the invitation that Theresa May had extended to Donald Trump last year. It then has turned into this working visit with a little less pomp and circumstance, although in that polling, it's interesting to note that a lot of people still weren't happy with the idea of Donald Trump meeting the Queen. Well, I'm joined just now by a supporter of Donald Trump who went to meet him very soon after he was elected as US President. Nigel Farage, thank you for coming along. You've been very vocal, obviously, in criticising the protests that we're expecting, especially these big protests tomorrow. But presumably, you would also accept that this is part of the democratic right of people.
Oh, the democratic right to protest, of course there is. But what is very odd is the number of people protesting Trump who don't protest when Arab dictators come who treat women as second-class citizens and conduct all sorts of barbarities against people. And for the Mayor of London, for the GLA to have allowed this blimp, to fly in Parliament Square. I mean, I can't think of any other country in the Western world that will allow that to happen. So I think that's really pretty poor behaviour.
Donald Trump, though, is something of a lightning rod for these sorts of protests because of the way he himself behaves. He has made issuing insults almost his stock in trade, hasn't he?
Of course. He's not a career politician. He's a businessman. He says it like he sees it. And look, I'm a supporter of his, but I would be the first to accept he often is very confrontational and brash in his approach. But I tell you something that is really interesting. He was elected on a ticket, a manifesto, and he's trying to